Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us, everybody. We're going to get started in just a moment. We had a little technical difficulty, as they say. I want to say thank you for patiently waiting and joining us today for this event. As some folks are getting their audio situated, getting their video situated, I want to say thank you. And I want to invite you to put in the chat who you are, where you're coming from, what community you serve. You could put that in the chat. That'll be great. So we can know who's on the line with us today. And just so everybody's aware, a little bit of housekeeping as we get started. This session is being recorded. So keep that in mind as you're joining us, that we do record all our sessions. We may take a pause for something important. It's all important, but for one aspect of this gathering. So just be aware of that. But for the most part, we do record it so that we can post it on our YouTube station and share it with everybody who registered, whether you were actually available to join us or not able to later on down the line. But again, in the chat, please put who you are, where you're coming from. And I'm going to put a few slides here on the screen for everybody to see. I'm trying to admit some other folks for joining us. See some familiar names and faces, so thank you for joining us. This is the second session in our series of Native nutrition. Hope, can you see the slide?
Yes, I can.
You see the big slide or the slide with the map?
Now I see the big slide.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Well, good afternoon. Bonjour, Chumanam. Thank you so much for joining us for our second session in the series of Native nutrition for prevention and healing. It is a great opportunity to allow us to gather together and learn from one another, learn from our presenter, and be able to process together in this journey of how do we look at our ancestral foods? How do we look at the foods of today? How do we move along in our journeys, considering our own history, our own native nutrition, so that it can help us in the field of prevention, so it can help us in our healing process. So I want to invite you in the chat to put who you are, where you're coming from, what community you serve. It's really helpful for us to understand the folks that are with us on the line today. This is a recorded session, and I want everybody to be aware of that. I'm going to invite you to mute your microphones unless you'd like to share something. You can also use the little icons in the reaction box to raise your hand or say something important to us as you're joining us and engaging in the conversation. I'm Dr. Allison Bays, and I serve at the National American Indian Alaska Native Prevention Technology Transfer Center. And we do have a really wonderful guest with us today, because we know that our center has the wonderful opportunity to serve folks all over this country in the lower 48 and Alaska. We're situated in the yellow area of this map at the University of Iowa. So we have the opportunity to work with all tribal communities in the contiguous states and Alaska. We have the opportunity to partner with different regions. We have the opportunity to partner with specific tribal communities who are willing to engage with us and support our communities in the field of prevention science. So thank you so much for joining us. Our sponsor, our funder, is SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. The content of this event for today is the creation of our presenter, who I'll introduce in a moment, and the opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of SAMHSA, HHS, or the American Indian Alaska Native PTTC. After today's event, you're going to receive an email with some important information. You'll receive a link to the presentation for today, the information that we share, the video recording. You'll also get some resources because we're really big with this series specifically on providing a toolkit for Native nutrition across the country. We know there's so many strengths and positives about what is being done to help us in this field, whether you have a subsistence way of living or you actually look at different ways to help your community learn how to garden, how to go back to tradition. So you're going to get a lot of follow-up resources from us at the end of our series. You're also going to get a link to the survey. This is really important to our team. It helps us understand what we did well and what are some areas where we can improve. That's very important to us. I will put this link at the end of the slide presentation also, and I'll put it in the chat box for anybody who can click on it. And if you have one of those fancy phones that can read a QR code, that's on the screen for you also to use for your follow-up survey at the end of our event. This also helps our funders see the quality of work that we're providing to our tribal communities across the country. So please know that it is anonymous, cannot be linked directly back to you, and it's important for us to get this information from each of you that are participating in today's session. Although we are gathered virtually today, it's really important to our team to acknowledge the land and pay respect to the Indigenous nations whose homelands were forcibly taken over and inhabited, past and present. We want to honor the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. This calls us to commit to forever learn how to be better stewards of these lands through action, advocacy, support, and education. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced occupation of Native American territories, and we respect the many diverse Indigenous people connected to this land on which we gather from time immemorial. While injustices are still being committed against Indigenous people of Turtle Island, today we say thank you to those that stand with our people and acknowledge that land reparations must be made to allow healing for our Indigenous peoples and to Mother Earth herself. This document was created by 3 of my former colleagues, Ella Driscoll, Keely Driscoll, and Sean Bear, all of whom come from the Meskwaki settlement, where the University of Iowa is nearby. I'm going to admit some folks into the session. And as they're joining us, I'm going to pause for just a few moments.
What we're doing is we're recognizing that we are surrounded by our Niji B'Madazik, our fellow living beings, the plants, the insects, the animals, all those living beings. We as the humans, we're the last ones here. So we're the youngest and the weakest. So we thank those plants that give us breath and food, and they give us everything, our clothing, everything that has been given to us doesn't come from humans. It comes from our Mother Earth, and all those beings from the east, the south, the west, the north. We recognize all those directions. We recognize those gifts. Inside that, when Mother Earth gives that gift, these little seeds are coming up. They're giving their gift. They're giving us that breath. They're giving us the food. They're cleaning the water. They're doing so many important tasks to be here on this earth. We recognize the water, Nibikong, and we wouldn't have any life without that precious water and those spirits that watch over that water. And for those beings in the sky world, the Geteayayeg, the ancient ones that watch over us, and all the stars and the clouds and all those beings. And then at the end of that, recognizing that we're living inside a globe, a circle in all the directions. And we ask too that Jawena Mishanam, we come with such humility that we know that we're pitiful. And we ask that we could hear direction, from the Manidug, the Gije Manidug, the loving spirit, Gichi Manidug, the great spirit, Manidug Neganazid, the leading spirit. Show us, those are different names for that creative force that has brought us here. And we're asking for guidance to live in a good way on this earth. So I feel very fortunate that I've learned from elders, heard many elders do prayers similar to this, where they recognize the legends and the teachings and the legends and the stories that are brought here to help us as humans, as the last ones that got here. So we're always thinking about all those beautiful life forms. It also reminds me of how we're taught all the time about health, about nutrition and health. But I always think of it, that symbol of the medicine wheel and the four directions, and how important it is not to get stuck on, oh, it's just mental health. No, 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 it's not just physical health. No, it's not just emotional health. It's not just spiritual health. Those all have to have balance. So we're always looking for this balance in this world, for learning to work on those things that might not be easy for us to work on. It might be easier for us to say work on our spiritual health, and I was like, no, no, I've got to work on my physical health, or it won't do any good for my spiritual health. Um, I'm grateful to be here today, and I'm living here in Minneapolis, the Minneapolis American Indian community. It's a pretty large urban environment. I started working in the Native programs in the 1970s with Division of Indian Work, and it's a large Native urban population. We're primarily Ojibwe, Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, Ho-Chunk, and then 2% of everybody else. So I used to have to keep stats for Indian education for Minneapolis, the city of Minneapolis. Then I did work for 6 years for SAMHSA in a program called Storytelling for Empowerment, where what a fun opportunity. I could go, my job was to go pick up elders. So I could go and bring tobacco and ask elders to come and from different tribal traditions to come and share the legends. So in this part of the world, the Atazukana, the legends, and also the beings within the legends are very much alive and very powerful. So we only talk about them after the frogs stop singing and the snow is on the ground. And then we can talk about them until the snow is gone and the frogs stop singing it or start singing again. We can't talk about them anymore because these are very powerful beings and we don't want to call on them for nothing. We want to be so respectful that we're watching, you know, what to do in a good way.
Okay.
Did you want to say?
Hold on, Kim.
Sure.
Yes. Thank you, Hope. And I know Hope did a wonderful prayer. And I want to say thank you, Chi-Miigwech, for that, bringing us together in a really good way. But I also want to share a little bit about with her before she gets moving and grooving with her important work that she does in the Minneapolis area. I'm hopeful that you can see the screen of the slideshow. I'm going to try and share that with each of you, where you see an image of Hope. Hope Flanagan is Seneca Nation, and she does work for the Dream of Wild Health, which is a nonprofit in the Minneapolis area. It is intertribal, it's independent organization, serves the Twin Cities community for our Native populations. She's an elder who continues to do good work. Even after she did all those jobs that she mentioned to you a few moments ago, she keeps going and serving our tribal communities through storytelling, through educating, and really helping us look at Native nutrition from a different perspective. She doesn't say a whole lot about herself, but there are different ways that you can reach Hope or find out more about Hope. The first little bullet here gives you her email, and I'll share that with you at the end of the presentation also. She is the community educator there with the gardening, with our youth, with our young people who want to learn about Native nutrition and the importance of that. And then the second bullet, again, I'm going to put these in the chat. Very important. She didn't say this at all, but I know this about her. She received an award 2 years ago for her environmental work. An important way that we recognize people who are in our community, who collaborate and work for the greater good of our people. And she was one who won that award. And then some other important information is She's helped with different ideas for food, and I'm going to include that in the chat also with cookbooks and whatnot. We will give you the link to all these important things during the chat after the event. But I do want to turn the floor over to Hope herself right now to keep sharing about the great work she's done, not just in Minneapolis, but across the country in the field of prevention science. And know that it is a wealth of knowledge that you're getting from this person, and know that she would love to collaborate with you no matter what region you're coming from. She does this work across the country, even though she resides in the Minneapolis area with Dream of Wild Health. If you haven't done so yet, please in the chat, put who you are, where you're coming from, what tribal community you serve. Put it in the chat so the rest of us can see who you are. We see some faces on the screen, but we don't see too many of them. And I turn the floor over to our presenter, Hope.
Oh, get you language. So you might be able to see it looks so young, but I'm not that young. I was of that era when my mom was afraid that we were going to get taken away, my sister and I. And so she gave us these necklaces. They were matching necklaces because that happened to a lot of people. Some of you may have grandmas or great grandmas that talk about that time. It was a scary time, you know, and there were a lot of things going on. So there was a consciousness of trying to be safe. And in my home, and some of you, I'm sure, can relate to this, it wasn't always safe. And there might be drinking, and there might be fights, there might be scary things going on. And we had that when I was little. But you don't tell anybody because then you might lose your kids. And of course, you're going to hear this over and over again in your communities that you end up with this code of silence. And I know for me, my greatest gift was being out in the woods. So we lived far enough away from any people that I knew that the woods were safe. And my mom would take my sister and I out picking. I remember that. And I loved that. And one of the things she would do is she'd say, go find something and bring it to me and I'll show you about it, you know. So that was a wonderful lesson. I was grateful for that. And I'm so grateful that we had those times together because later, um, when we started being more involved in the community, my mom would say, go help that elder over there. So that was my first experience because we had moved away from my back home community. It was pretty scary over there what was going on. So now we had moved and we were here and to the Minneapolis community. And so forever I was trying to help out the elders that I was around. And the way I could help out best when I was younger was I would go and fetch plants for people. So I was always doing that. And I was grateful for that gift because those elders, they would always teach you things, you know, when you did that. And finally, there's one elder I was so grateful to spend time with her. And finally, she said, now I'm going to give you teachings and this is going to be your name. Now, here's me. You know, I'm like, well, but I'm Seneca. And she goes, no, no, no. You're going to get my auntie's name because you're going to do my auntie's work. So she was a namer. Majiki Kwe was Siban, Anakudu Kweban. She had 4 different names. And she goes, now your job is going to be fetching plants for elders and for the people, whoever needs them and can't get out in the woods and get them themselves. So I was like, okay, I'll do that. And then many, many years later, after working with Indian education and working for SAMHSA for 6 years, that was when there was an elder lady from Panema. It's one of our old time communities up there at Red Lake. Her name was Ona Kingbird, and Ona publicly gave me her things and said, now you carry the stories. Because I had been driving her around. That was the trick, is if I could borrow my mom's car, I would pick up these elders and drive them to where they ever needed to be and help them out. And what a gift that was, you know, because gosh, I would always be given such amazing teachings. And I was so honored when Ona passed that on to me. Of course, you know, some of you probably have experienced this too. Early on, in the late 70s, early 80s, I worked for the Division of Indian Work, and we started a program called American Indian Spiritual Growth and Culture Camp. And my job was to go visit all these different elders, like from the different medicine lodges. So from like the Sundance people in South Dakota, or in Wisconsin, the Medicine Lodge, Ojibwe folks, or the Medei Lodge people, the Ho Chunk people that were Native American Church or from their medicine lodge. And then I would ask them if they would come and speak to our youth. So we did that American Indian Spiritual Growth and Culture Camp, and we had 100 Native students from different tribes. And one thing I learned right away is when I'd go visit these elders back in those days, and some of you might recognize the names that I would say if I was to say, oh yeah, Amos Owens, and you know, the Looking Horses from South Dakota. So you'll hear these names, you go like, oh yeah, I remember hearing about those fellows, those old timey folks. Um, you'd know that in order to have those responsibilities, you had to be staying away from drugs and alcohol. So one of the teachings that was always put out there is if you're going back to that way, if you're going back to the drugs and alcohol, like if it's weed, if it's heroin, if it's alcohol, you've got to give your Gedijiwanan, your spiritual items. You give them to someone who's clean and sober, because you know, like it says right on the bottle, it says spirits, right? And those items, those spiritual items, they carry a spirit of a powerful spirit for helping us, you know. And if you drink that alcohol, I remember hearing this many times from elders, alcohol's made out of something that went bad. So if it's beer or grain that went bad, or if it's grapes, or you know, like wine that went bad, or corn or whiskey that went bad, our people didn't eat bad things back in the day. This is what I would hear. And they'd say, when you take that spirit, and it says spirits, you pour it down your throat, your spirit has to leave. And when your spirit leaves all the way, that's a blackout. So now you've given that spirit of addiction a body and arms and legs. You've given them a physical body. You've given them your own body. So early on, I heard about the importance of addiction and trying to live in a clean way. But also, I can say for me, that early childhood time, there was a lot of trauma, and I really struggled with anxiety and depression and suicidal thoughts. And today we know that that's a big, big issue with our young ones. So it came to me pretty hard too. And a lot of times what happens is people will try to self-regulate with some kind of drug. For me, I got introduced by a doctor to Xanax, and I really got into it where I would have to take 4 Xanax every 6 hours. So I really got stuck on that stuff. And it was really scary because I tried just doing ceremonies. Ceremonies are wonderful. And some people can stay clean and sober with ceremonies, but I needed more than that. So I went to the spa. Back in those days in the 70s, if you went there to get cleaned up, they had um, exorcisms there and shock therapy. So it was different back in those days. Really scary. And it took me three times to get it to stick because of those ways that you have to work on trying to find balance mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. Um, I'm so grateful that I still work. I still go to support circles. Right now, I've been spending every weekend at the Sugar Bush. And everybody there, I mean, there's no alcohol there. Everybody has to work hard. You're cutting wood and hauling sap and making taffy and making sugar, because back in the day, you had to get those calories to survive. So even today, when you say, how old are you? You say, this is how many winters I survived. So when you say that, those beautiful calories that the trees would give, whether it was the sugar that you stuffed into the birch bark cones, and then you carried that to your summer camp, your fishing camp. um, that was one way that people survived. Up in northern Minnesota here, there's not much soil. So in the rocky areas, like the Boundary Waters and those areas, there's not enough soil to really grow the Three Sisters. I know in some communities you could really find a little bit of soil near the creeks and the rivers. There'd be some mud, and there'd be a ways to grow some of those plants. But mostly, when I was growing up, when I would get requests from people and people would ask about plants, it was always the Owasia, the wild ones. And then the Awakanag are what they call the enslaved ones, the Three Sisters and the domesticated plants. Today, I work at Dream of Wild Health. I've been working there for 15 years. I work with the youth, and I work with the plants, of course, the wild plants. And then in the wintertime, I do the storytelling. So pretty soon now it's going to switch over to, there's always something. There's always a season for picking. So right now I'm picking the buds for the Minigan. Some of you, that's not a real word. It's a fake word, but it's for that skin salve that Ojibwe folks just love. So the buds, picking that, and then I'm picking the nettles, the nettle stalks for making fish nets. Ignatia Broker from Night Flying Woman, she showed me that one. She said, pull over. And so she showed me how to make the old timey fish nets. Um, and then of course, sugar bush is so important. Right now here in Minnesota, the ducks and the geese are, right now the geese are pretty much returned, but the ducks are starting to return too. So all these animals are so generous in returning to us. So we want to keep our thank yous to them for all the living beings, even the tiny, tiny ones in the soil, because we know now what we eat has to match, in our gut has to match the health of the soil. If climate change or overuse or pesticides, herbicides, genetically modified organisms get in that soil and alter the life of the soil, then we can't process what we eat. So our physical health is degraded. Most of you as Native folks will know that the biological diversity hotspots on Earth now are all on native land, because we didn't destroy our soil. That's why. And we still have biodiversity on our land. So we're going to have to be really vigilant, even in this time of climate change, to make sure that whatever we can do to keep that biodiversity and those diversity of life forms going, that we do that. um, at Dream of Wild Health, we're doing that. We're trying to do like the no-till, and then I'm always out in the woods trying to find out what's going on with the changes in the wild plants, because we're certainly see changes in wild plants, changes in animals, changes in birds, changes in all life because of climate change. I was just looking at how birds are getting devastated by the avian flu that can be passed on to humans, but it's really hitting especially the eagles, the hawks, the owls, the predator birds. But I mean, we see it across all the different life forms. I was doing a presentation this weekend on making birch bark cones to pack your maple sugar in. And you can see, I showed them the difference. I said, see this piece of birch bark? This poor birch tree had 8 different climate related diseases. So the birch trees are really struggling. And that would be a way that if you ate off your birch dishes, you would get all that healthy betulin. The chemistry of the birch tree is really good for healing and fighting cancer and fighting autoimmune diseases. So if you're eating off of birch, you're getting dose of medicine every day. You know, you're getting all that good. You're living in a birch house. You're canoeing in a birch canoe. Everything around you that you've made, most of your utensils are made out of birch. So you're always getting that benefit. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Dream of Wild Health, because we're, like I said, I've been there for 15 years, and I believe we're coming up on the 23rd year at Dream of Wild Health. So hopefully I can show this video. Allison will show this video, and it explains a little bit about Dream of Wild Health.
You're going to need to bear with me because I have the video. We're just struggling a little bit with how to get the audio to work with us. So,
any suggestions, anyone?
I have the share sound on. Select this option if you want others to hear the sounds coming from your computer as well as your shared screen. So I check that. I'm going to get to the video and see if it'll work with us. If not, Hope, then we'll just keep going.
Okay. Would you like me to keep going right now?
No, I have it on right now. I'm just going to.
Okay. Okay. It's fun to see the young ones, to see what Dream of Wild Health really is. Dream of Wild Health, I've got my shirt on right here. Dream of Wild Health, we have 30 acres, and it's mostly farmland. And last year we produced 12.25 tons of food that went back into the Native community. So we teach the young ones about growing their own food, and we teach the young ones about cooking their own, harvesting their own food, cooking their own food. And you'll see, if you see the videos, you'll see that the young Native students start at 8 years old. So they start with learning about seed growth. If you're dealing with our old traditional seeds, a lot of times you'll see here we have some corn. Sometimes we'll have quite a few different varieties of corn. Like we'll have, like, as you can see, there's Dakota hominy corn. There's oh gosh, we've had Ponca corn, Ho Chunk corn, with the different kinds, like soup corn, grinding corn, flint corn, popcorn. This is our director, and our right there's Jessica Greendeer. She's our lead farmer. And there's some of the young ones. So this is our youngest group. This is the chorus kids. There's me. I'm out there doing the deal too. And each year when we grow out these seeds, we'll be given seeds sometimes, or we'll be rescuing seeds from sometimes museums. They've been sitting in collections for years and years and years. And Jessica Greendeer, who's speaking right now, she'll find ways to get those seeds to sprout. And here we are, we're trying. Sometimes it's not easy to get young Native folks to try new foods, but once they are the ones that are working with the food, then you'll see that they're more interested. This is one of our students that started out as a chorus kid, and now she's doing all kinds of amazing things with Augsburg, because we do sometimes we'll do the food. We'll do the scholarships. This young lady too received a scholarship through Dream of Wild Health, and now she's a youth leader as well in a different program. She's from White Earth. And this young man, he's from White Earth too. So here we are. Of course, we do hand weeding, and this is our area where we have our ancient seeds. So we're training the young ones about seed keeping. We're training the young ones about preparing. So here we're making teas. Here's one of our young ones too. They learn to do like farm tours. And then this young gentleman there, he's learning to be a storyteller. And this is one of our parents who's talking about working with our youth. And then these young ones, like this particular young lady is now working with Sean Sherman. So Sean Sherman is on our board. He opened the Owamini restaurant, and now our young ones go from working at the farm to working at his restaurant, which received a Restaurant of the Year award this year for the United States. So we have many different kinds of tomatoes, many different kinds of beans. Here we recognize Ernie Whiteman was one of the artists that worked with us for many years. This is me just going on and on. So yeah, I'm really fortunate. I get to be there, get to be with the youth. Uh, and we want to empower those youth so that they have a voice. Last night I was talking to one of the teachers who works with our students, and she said, you can tell the young ones that are in outside programs because they have a voice. Those young Native ones that are out there that learn how to express what's going on. This is our morning circle. Every morning we start with prayer and a fire. We have a house there, and there's our picnic tables where we have lunch every day. We have an underground oven that we do our old style underground cooking. Here's some of our different kinds of corn. You can see that's a Cree corn that never gets very tall because it doesn't have a very long growing span. Here's some of our peppers. Um, Sometimes we'll have people from different tribal communities that'll bring their seeds. I know in some instances we have seeds that have never been off their reservation before, but we're growing them out in case climate changes so much that those seeds are no longer vital in their communities. So that's something we'll do. If we have some rare seeds and we grow them out and we see, oh my gosh, they're thriving. This young man is a Arikara, so he's brought seeds to from the Arikara Nation, and we've brought seeds from like some of the Pueblos and grown out those seeds, like peppers that had never been outside of the Pueblos before, to honor those seeds in case there's such a shift with climate change that the seeds aren't able to thrive. So these are things you want to be thoughtful about. It's important to have a good sense of humor, right? So here's in the back, we have a good chunk of land that's donated to the pollinators because a lot of research, I've been working with Heather Holm a bit, and what she's finding is that often there's a one-to-one correspondence per pollinator with native plant. So we might find that for each native plant, there might be one specific fly that pollinates that native plant. Now, once you start seeing the collapse in a system, you'll start seeing, uh-oh, pollinators are in trouble, which means the plants are in trouble. So that's why we have to be so mindful about like keeping this pollinator meadow up to snuff, so it's supporting the insects that support the birds that support the plants that we absolutely need if we want to survive. You know, for us, I know we're always thinking about big picture, you know, like when I say Niji Bimadazik, my fellow living beings, you have to think that way because you might say, oh my gosh, it's just a wood tick. I can't be thankful for a wood tick. Well, I always have an elder teacher, and my elder teacher right now is from Nigigunsi up in Canada. She and the elder Ernie Whiteman, that was Arapaho, he always used to say, you kill something, you eat it. And I said, even a wood tick? And she said, yes. Like, oh, okay, we got to teach the kids that. So even when they're picking potato bugs, if they kill something, you eat one. I said, what? And then finally, I give her tobacco. You always have to give tobacco when you're talking to an elder. I said, why is it that you want us to eat one? She said, it's like this. You're telling your body what the problems are out there. So if you have a diseased wood tick and you eat it, you're letting your body know. It was our old way of inoculation because you're introducing a challenge that's here on this earth to your body. And she used to say, and she still says, make sure you give a sample once a year to Mother Earth so she knows what the challenges are out there. And it's absolutely true that she will respond by bringing those plants forward that are healing medicines. If we're doing our thank yous, if we're doing our old ways, if we're keeping our body active by going out and picking wild rice, by honoring the plants that give themselves as food, by honoring those animals and not like, just, oh, it's an animal. You always do your thank yous beforehand. You do your thank yous after taking a life. And if it doesn't matter if it's the life of an ant or a deer, you do your thank yous because you're taking a life. So always being mindful that we're part of a system. So here's an example. I get lots of requests like from different places. So I was asked to present at the University of Minnesota chemistry class, and I said, "Oh, I'm so excited. I want to learn more about phytoremediation." And what that is how the plants clean the soil, and they will treat Mother Earth the exact same way that they treat us. So if you take a healing plant like gumweed, it draws out cadmium and heavy metals from our body the exact same way that it'll do for Mother Earth. It'll say, I'm going to take it on. And phytoremediators will do that uh, and release the toxins as a gas or store it in their own body. They'll take the hit. They'll store it in their own roots. Sometimes they take it into their own leaves, or sometimes they take it into their own stems. They'll take the hit and save us, which is so generous. That's why when you say Joanna Missionam, we are so thankful you guys are taking the hit for us. And you're just so thankful that they're considerate like that and loving like that. But when I went to the chemistry department to hear more about these individual native plants and how they individually doctored Mother Earth and individually doctored us, they said, oh, we can't talk about that. I'm like, why? And they said, because that's organic chemistry. And we can't talk about organic chemistry. We can only talk about this kind of chemistry. So what we're seeing is outside of the Native community, a lot of times teachings are so siloed that they don't realize this is an entire systems.
Mhm.
That if we think we're going to get rid of we'll say, oh, those are a pest to corn. So we're just going to dip all the seeds in neonicotinoids, this extreme poison that was given. When I say neonicotinoids, yes, you hear that word nicotine. That's where it comes from, So we know that that's a poison, right? But it's also really powerful, right? You've already heard me talking about bring your tobacco to an elder, offer it to your elder, like, whoa. Anyway, we've got to being mindful of, if you're going to dip your seeds in neonicotinoids, you've just poisoned those seeds and poisoned the soil that you've put those seeds in. Now, of course, you're going to see dead bees, dead ants, dead birds, dead monarch butterflies. That's what you're going to see in those fields. Now here's something we have to deal with, is those corn plants that they're making them really toxic because now they can turn it into methanol. They put out, they're wind pollinators, so that pollen gets in the air. We don't know how toxic it is for our breathing system, but they can sue us with our Ojibwe hominy corn or Bear Island corn because we're stealing their pollen. They can sue us for doing that. I'm like, oh no. So one thing we teach the young ones about is we can teach them about corn condoms. So we'll put corn condoms on the top of the tassel, which is the male part of the corn, and on the cob of the corn, which is the female part of the corn. So it's very helpful to think about those different systems of how does the corn reproduce? How do the beans reproduce? Because those are self-sustaining, so you don't have to worry about insects with them. They'll self-pollinating. The squash, though, they need those insects. So the male flowers come first, and they're like, come here, visit us. And then here comes the female flowers with all of our different kinds of squash. Now we'll run into issues because of climate change. I know at the farm we really were struggling, and all around us as well, really struggled with the squash borers that go right into the vines. But watch your plants, because what would happen is the squash plants, they'd be coming up and they'd get hit by the squash borers, and then they would try to do a runner so that they could re-root and avoid the part of the stalk that had the borers inside of it. So there's an intelligence that's way beyond us. We have to keep remembering that. Do our thank yous, put out our tobaccos, go to those ceremonies. Me, I remember from my mental and emotional health, I'm always thinking about like building family. Think like a tribal member. Think like a good relative. Because I know I'm sitting here, maybe I know something about picking wild plums, but I might need to go to Allison and say, hey, I don't know anything about X, Y, or Z. We all have gifts. Every living being has gifts. So I don't know what Allison's gifts are. She's probably got all sorts of secret gifts that she could share with me. And I'd be like, oh my goodness, that's so awesome. So if we work together, if we have tribal thinking instead of me, then we're going to thrive. And I think that the rest of the world is starting to understand that a little bit, you know, where it's more about helping each other and have your circle of support. Our young ones need it too. Have that circle of support instead of look at how much I have. If you look at our legends, there's all kinds of teachings in our legends about the problems of wanting to acquire stuff. In the Ojibwe language, it's all verbs. It's all what do you do? It's not what do you have. There's two different ways to make nouns because stuff is so unimportant. And there's a spirit that they talk about, and some people don't even like to say the name of the spirit, but I'm going to say it. It's called the Wendigo spirit, and it's the spirit of addiction. It's addiction to money. It's addiction to sex. It's addiction to material possessions. It's addiction to heroin. It's a big addiction to technology. And most of you probably have seen your kids that cannot stop getting on their phones. It's a sickness. They are sickened by an addiction. So we have this story, and in many stories that talk about the Wendigo spirit, and that's an ice monster. And the problem with the Wendigo is the more it eats, the more it wants. The more it wants, the hungrier it gets. And the Wendigo eats his own lips. He's so hungry. Of course, that's to his disadvantage, but isn't every addiction that way? It's not to your advantage to want more, a bigger house, 10 cars, 14 bathrooms. That was always like, why? But it you start thinking about how this society is sickened by its own addictions. So we're thinking about, if I think the other way, if I think about back in the day when I first started working at Division of Indian Work, I remember there was a 12-year-old girl from White Earth that was so proud because she had shot her first deer with a bow and arrow. Well, back in those days, what do? You don't go, yay, give me presents. No, you have your giveaway. So she invited everybody to come, just like we used to always do, and then feast the deer. You want to say thank you. It's your first kill ceremony. And you give away your things. Back then, people didn't have much, so you give away the things you truly love, that like sometimes it was your clothes, sometimes it was whatever you had to give. So nowadays, some of those young ones that are starting to learn about ricing. That's how I stay healthy, is out at the sugar bush, out fishing, out picking, out walking in the woods, out ricing. I never miss ricing because it's a way to stay healthy. If I'm canoeing, if I'm knocking, maybe I'm not the best knocker in the world, but I'm moving and I'm seeing what's going on with my body. If I'm not doing well, then I bring tobacco to an elder about, like, what do I need to do to heal? And maybe they suggest a plant, or maybe they have, they say, go to find out more from the shake tent, or from a lodge that's going to help you find out what to do. So I'm not above uh, anything. I was taught, you don't know who your teachers are. And for me, it's kind of like, the creator's got a great sense of humor, It's going to say your greatest teacher is going to be the one you suspect the least. So you gotta stay humble. And I'm like, what does that mean? Oh, you're gonna find like in one of my 12-step groups I go to, there's a fellow who's a preacher from Harvard. I'm like, oh boy, no. But I had to go like, creator likes to do these things to me. I have to listen to this guy so I can learn. So don't ever make a judgment about, I can't learn from that one. That's just a little kid. Sometimes those babies are so wise and remember things that we don't remember anymore because we're too far away from that spirit world and we've forgotten so much. So gosh, it's always keeping in mind mentally, am I staying sharp? Am I learning something? Am I spending time? And so, doesn't mean you have to read a book. Spend time outside, watch an insect, watch a bird, watch a plant, whatever. Spend time with the elder, spend time with the baby. You're going to learn something. Emotionally, care about somebody else. That was one of my big lessons for me in my life because with that Xanax and the suicidal ideation, I went for a whole year without any time free from suicidal ideation. And there was a friend of mine from Leech Lake, and she said, well, if you do it, I'll do it too. And I'm like, oh, no, you're important. You're valuable. The very next day, I had my first hour free from suicidal ideation. So sometimes when you care about someone else or something else and know, I'm going to put my life energy into helping, being of service, helping out, my fellow, if it's your fellow native people, if it's your fellow living beings, whoever it is that you're helping, and maybe you're really interested in insects, and maybe you're really interested in our fruiting trees. If you're helping, it's going to take you away from that focus on me, 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 me. Look at poor, pitiful me. That's what keeps us so sick, is that obsession of self. So we knew that back in the day. I truly believe that. Find somebody who's still practicing those old ways, because if you can find someone who's still practicing those old ways, they're gonna know some of these tricks about like spend time outside, spend time in prayer and listening, meditate. So I always hear this one: prayer is just like, what do you want me to do? End of story. That's your whole prayer. And then meditation is getting quiet enough to hear the answer. So I love in our communities, all the communities that I know of up here, we all had vision quests. So I'm been very grateful for Ogima Gwinebik and Pebamba Benes for taking people out to do their vision time, where you would go for 4 days, no food, no water. And the way they do it is you would be out on an island, and then they visit you once a day to see how you're doing. And you're asking for guidance. That's what it is. I know right now is a time that people go seeking their names as well. And that's another way that you're given direction, because it takes you out of self, because now you have this name that shows you a responsibility. So for me, knowing Nudenesikwe, that's my name. There was the lady who carried that name before me. Her job was to help people with plants, to help the young ones, and to help the stories. Simple. That's why I'm here. That's what I'm supposed to do. And I feel the rewards of it. I get the joy of it. And never get egotistical. That's the hardest part. It's like stay away from that. So stay active mentally, stay active spiritually. If you ever get into a group of native people, a group of native kids, ask them about, have you ever had an experience that was unexplainable? oh my gosh, it's so fun because I've never seen a group of Native kids that doesn't get the conversation rolling. So you'll hear stories from their families. Um, so you'll hear stories from themselves, and you'll get that spark going of, yes, there's so much beyond what we see here on the physical plane. What I hear often is in the prayers, I didn't say it today, but often you'll hear things like Anuk, the white-throated sparrow, sings that song of four dimensions are hanging, 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 hanging. So he sings it, the four hanging, four times. And what he's talking about is there's other dimensions than this one. And time isn't linear, even though we want to believe that. In this spiritual way of being, even the sweat lodge shows it by those four rings, those four dimensions. And in some communities, each ring of the sweat lodge will have a different kind of a tree for a different purpose. But that depends on the community. That's, I'm not trying to judge anything about anybody, but it's a reminder that we're shown this, this world and this physical material stuff, but it's not necessarily, it's definitely not all there is. So you'll hear elders or young ones say, "Oh, I saw a little person. I saw Memengwesi. I saw Sabe. I saw Bigfoot. I saw," you'll hear all kinds of stuff. "My grandma came, sat on my bed today, and she's been gone for a long time." Or, "Do you remember when I was the mom and you were the baby?" So you'll hear stuff like that all the time if you hang around long enough with the little ones. So they're seeing that there's these different dimensions, there's different ways of being, these different worlds. We're standing on Oma'aki, this here on this earth, but there's different ways of being in this world. So that's just a reminder of mental, spiritual, physical. It's a hard one for people my age because you think you're spoiling yourself by sitting on the couch and watching TV or playing on your computer. You think that's like, oh, I'm doing fun stuff. Or because every time you do that, you're giving up the next time you want to stand up, the next time you want to walk, the next time you want to go to ceremony, the next time you want to go out picking choke cherries, whatever. You've got to keep moving that body in order to keep moving that body. And sometimes I see that our young ones, if they're so busy on their computers, they can't do the physical work either. So, gosh, Ernie, he was in his 70s when he and I would do the wood cutting, and then we get the young ones out there to stack the wood. And we're like, gosh, these young ones need to move or they're not going to be able to move ever. So, it is a concern. We want to make sure that those young ones are out moving. Um, and of course, sometimes when they say, gosh, the evidence is so ugly out there, there's climate change, the water's not pure, it's hard to get, where are you going to get fish that don't have mercury? There's a lot of negative evidence, but you can't get stuck in the evidence of that. You've got to keep thinking about, what can I do to help myself and all the other beings on this earth plane thrive? Because we don't know how long this situation is. We can be in the present moment, but I know I've heard people say at the end there'll be moccasin tracks. I'm like, oh, I like that. So stay healthy. Remember our old ways. Remember how to gather food. Remember how to prepare food. Remember how to get water, how to purify water. Get those things going where you know how to take care of yourself and others in your circle. That's going to help you not succumb to that hopelessness, that helplessness, that, oh, I'm so sad, now I have to go smoke weed, or now I'm so pitiful, I'm going to shoot up. Because it's those things that we've got to have things to offer our young ones where they won't get so overwhelmed by the evidence that that's what they think is their only answer. So get them in a support group, and it's like, gosh, help this one. You're always going to find somebody who's struggling in a different way than you are. And those young ones can help that one.
Thank you, Hope. I know it's really important to reiterate what Hope mentioned. You know, today's times, signs of the times show that our kids focus on themselves. But when we look at our culture, Hope, you said it so perfectly. It's not about me, me, me. It's about us, our community. And we are collectivistic by nature. And so it's really important to remember how our ancestors lived, whether it's growing our crops, whether it's singing our songs, whether it's dancing, whether it's telling our stories. Look for the value, the strengths in our culture. And our nutrition is one area of all of that. These are protective factors. These are ways that we can help our young people stay on a good path and be healthy and be successful. So I want to say thank you for bringing that up. We don't have a whole lot of time, but in the next maybe 15 minutes, if there are questions, this is a great time for you to share in the chat who you are, where you're coming from, what tribal community you serve. You haven't had a chance to do that yet, but also post a question in the chat if you have it, or if you want to share your question out loud or clarify something with Hope, unmute yourself, raise your hand in the reaction, using the reaction button. But this is a good time to have this expert community gardener educator with us, sharing the work that she's done, but also sharing the lessons that she's learned with growing. I know some people who reached out to me prior to today wanted to know specifically about some things that you shared about the soil. If you are unsure how to make sure you have good, healthy soil, what do you do? What are some of the first steps? I know that was a question that a couple of folks did ask. And so you have just a quick answer for that might be helpful.
What you can do is take a look at what comes up from that soil, because the plants are going to tell you. The plants know. It's amazing. So you can come, like if you came to the Dream Wild Health Farm and you saw which plants were growing in certain places, you could look and see how the soil's doing. So for example, this year we were growing some yellow tomatoes that would get a spot on them, and it said, oh, look, this shows that there's a lack of magnesium in the soil in this spot. So sometimes by that you can see what's going on. Like when I go to this spot in St. Paul, I love this spot, but I go there and I'm like, oh my gosh, all these plants here are phytoremediators. These are plants that are like, this soil is super damaged. So you'll see like wormwood and stinkweed and oh gosh, the kind of plants you're going to see along the side of the road. Because if you look along the side of the road, like close to the road, those are usually plants that are trying to doctor what we've done to Mother Earth on either side with all the pollutants and the toxins that our cars are carrying. So like for me, when I'm driving down the highway and I see, oh boy, there's a lot of curly dock, there's a lot of wormwood, whatever it is that's showing up and showing up and showing up. It can deal with all those toxins. So be thoughtful about that it's trying to clean up the soil. So sometimes though, it'll be the other way around where the last couple of years, well, it went to an extreme this year in Minnesota because we were flooded to the north and drought to the south with climate change. So to the north, there was a plant I had never, ever seen before. And one guy had spotted it the year before. It's Trailing Arbutus. And I was out in the woods. I'm like, what the heck? I've never, ever seen Trailing Arbutus before. And it was everywhere. So I didn't know how to use Trailing Arbutus because I'd never even seen it. So I went to a Potawatomi friend and she goes, oh, that's the symbol of our tribe. She goes, that signifies change. And so I'm like, I've got to learn about Trailing Arbutus because it's showing up for a reason. Just like all the way from like Bad River Res in Wisconsin, all the way up to Grand Marais, there was a thick ring of valerian root. And valerian root is like major pain and mental health issues. And it's like, it's showing up because humans are having major pain and mental health issues, So the plants, they're so kind to us. Just pay attention to show who's showing up and where they're showing up. So I've got a lot to learn too. Like the plants teach me stuff all the time. This October, I took a group of people up from the Andayang Native Youth Housing group, and we went up to Moose Lake on the way to Duluth, and oh my gosh, here's all this trailing arbutus. Never saw it there before. We were picking bear root, and we're using that for a liver cleanse. So for your relatives that are getting off of drugs, even heroin, whatever it is, to clean out your liver and your kidneys, we have plants that help with that. Do the teas, so we were picking that, but here was trailing arbutus. Like I said, it was everywhere this year. So I'm looking at it in October, the flower was completely ready and waiting for May. When does that happen? When do you see a flower in October? And then it got covered up with the snow and it was ready to be there. So clearly that plant is showing us that we need to be prepared. That's one thing I'm seeing, that we need to be prepared. And I do know that you can make a tea out of it for urinary tract issues. So yeah, cleaning, keeping our bodies clean and healthy. Ask, if you've got elders to ask, like, what do I need to do about heavy metals? Like, I know I actually, people give me heck and say, Hope, did anybody give you tobacco to say this? I'm like, no, but I'm talking to Native folks and I want them to have some healing. In the spring, when the what they call scouring rush first comes up, you'll see the light colored ones. Eat a few of those, because those pull out mercury and pull out heavy metals. It helps with heavy metals, and we all have too much heavy metals in our system right now. So just trying to be aware of what's going on with the plants. So you get a whole bunch of non-native peoples now asking what's going on with the plants, and we're going to have to be protective, because even the University of Minnesota was teaching a class about, like, if you take a picture of a plant, now anybody can harvest that data and go get that plant. We're going to have to think about that, because we're going to have to treat them like they're a tribal member and they're protected, because some of them are precious and endangered and are just hanging on because we haven't let our land get destroyed. If there's places where our land wasn't destroyed.
These are good points. Thank you, Hope. It's so key to remember these important facts about our indigenous ways of knowing, our knowledge, our tradition. Catherine Martin shared a really good story about her grandfather. Catherine, are you still on? Do you want to share it out loud, or do you want me to read it? Catherine Martin? You're welcome to unmute yourself.
I couldn't unmute. My grandfather was a criminal defense attorney. This was back in the early 1900s. And he owned, the house sat on an acre of land in the middle of town. And he used to say, if you want to get grounded, put your hands in the dirt. Now, this was before the days before they had rototillers. So he had this about a quarter of the acre that he would spade with a spading fork, a hoe, and a heavy rake. And it would take him sometimes a week, 2 weeks to prepare the land for the seeds. But again, I've never forgotten that. I'm in my 80s, and I have never forgotten that. If you want to get grounded, get your hands in the dirt.
So key.
That's
Thank you.
Beautiful. Can I say that's how Dream of Wild Health got started? There was an elder lady named Sally Auger, and she and her husband John, they started a housing program for Native women who are in domestic abuse situations and Native men coming out of prison. And they decided to have a garden, and they saw, it was visual, that the men when they had their hands in the dirt, the women when they had their hands in the dirt, they were happier, they were more positive. So even today, that's how Dream Wild Health really got started, is they saw that it was true. What she's saying is absolutely true. And now, like, we're working with the Indian Health Board, the psychiatric department there, and that was the first thing that the head of the ED of the Indian Health Board for the psychiatric department said is, you got to get those kids, get their hands in the dirt, because it's healing to get your hands in the dirt. Thank you. Thank you for saying that.
Yes, thank you. That's key information. And it's really important to know that we don't need to wait till we're an elder or till we're an adult to get started with this information. Are you able to see the large screen, or do you see the one with the notes?
I see the one with the notes.
Okay, I'll trade it out. Here we go. We're not quite done. We still have a few minutes. So if there are other folks who have questions or concerns, I did put the survey information in the chat box, so you can click on that and it'll take you to our survey. I have it here on the screen for you also. But at the very top of the screen where it says for more information, I have the link to our center, the Native Center for Behavioral Health, where you can see all of the services that we provide for different areas of need with our tribal communities, whether it's through our addiction center, our mental health center, our mental health with K through 12 specifically, our trauma stress initiative for children center, and then the one that you're joined with us today is our prevention center. But if you want to find out more about any of the services that we offer, you can do so by that first link. This session, Native Nutrition for Prevention and Healing, is only the second in our series. We have 3 more to go, and Hope has given us a really good perspective and guide for this in the way of education, community gardening, things of that nature. And the video, my apologies, I could not get that sound to work for me, but it'll be sent to you as a link in all of the follow-up materials, as well as the recording of today's session. But our next one is actually next Tuesday, where we're going to have another community organizer in the Minneapolis Twin Cities area who's going to speak to the work that she and her center does with mothers and children. It's a really great way to look at how do we start this process from the get-go when our children are in utero and then when our children are here on this earth. So she's going to talk about some really great ways that we can look at Native nutrition from that perspective. Also that same week, and I failed to include the link here, but next Thursday on April 6th, we're going to have another Native chef come speak to us about his work that he's done across the globe, literally, with other indigenous populations, lessons he's learned, and the work that he currently does as a Native man here in the U.S. with the Red Lake Nation, and the important ways that we can train and share this with our young people and show that there's a spiritual connection to our food, to our gardens, to our tobacco, because everything our young people are learning right now about tobacco from television and the radio and ads is all about commercialization of tobacco. But we know that it is a sacred herb. It is a prayer instrument for us traditionally when we look at it and we use it from what we grow in our own gardens, because it's prayed over to get to us to use in ceremony. So I hope that you can register for those sessions. If you go to our website, you'll see the registration links for all of the sessions. But the third and final one that we'll have a couple weeks from now on April 18th, we're going to have an anthropologist come and speak to us about prevention and how that relates to our nutrition for diabetes and health and wellness surrounding that aspect. And looking again at our history, our traditions, our indigenous ways of knowing, because there's so many lessons to be learned going back 7 generations and things that we can continue to share with our future children, grandchildren, 7 generations forward. I want to say thank you to everybody. Chi-miigwech. We have a few minutes. If anybody has questions, I don't see any in the chat, but
I wanted to mention something. Like I said, it's always gathering time for something. And my elders would say this is gathering time for the red willow. Now it depends, it depends on your community, but that was how you would make Mitigo Asema stick tobacco. So that's what, like, when I was at Sugar Bush this weekend, that's what our camp leader was talking about, was that's what he wanted to receive, was the stick
Mhm.
tobacco, and that families would have traditional blends. So if you had that red willow in Lakota, you say chan sha sha, which means bark red red, chan sha sha, in Ojibwe you might say Miskwa beamish, the red sticks, and there's many stories about the trickster making the red sticks. There isn't any nicotine in there, but it is slight pain relief. So if you went to one of the elders I worked with, she would say for their family blend, it was 4 different kinds of dogwoods, because that's another name for that is red osier dogwood. So they'd use the 4 different kinds of dogwood. One of the other old tobaccos was lobelia, the different kinds of the cardinal flower, great blue lobelia, or even the bay lobelia. There's different kinds of lobelia,
Mhm.
but there was that Nicotiana rustica east of the Mississippi. It was all one species of tobacco, but its form was very, very different, and it had a lot of nicotine in it. And then when the non-native folks came here, they were bringing tobacco from the islands, from the Hispaniola and down in Cuba and those areas. That was Nicotiana tabacum. So it was really powerful. So there's a really interesting story about when John Smith and Massasoit got together. John Smith gave Massasoit alcohol, and Massasoit gave John Smith tobacco. I was like, whoa, so powerful. I mean, such powerful gifts. Scary because they're that powerful. So at the farm, we'll grow out different tribal tobaccos like the Nicotiana rustica, and sometimes, and we've never grown out any of the Nicotianas from the Southwest and from the West, because you have a variety in the Southwest and the West where they're not just the Nicotiana rustica. East of the Mississippi, it's all Nicotiana rustica, if that makes sense. But it might look like the Arikara type is going to look way different than the Seminole type or the Micmac type, so the tobaccos will visually look different, but they're, the same species, if that makes sense. So
Mhm.
it's beautiful and highly valued, but how on earth back in the day are you going to carry a whole bunch of that in your tobacco in your canoe to get from place to place to be addicted to it? You wouldn't. So there's no way you could have be carrying all that around to have any kind of level of addiction back with the relatives from a long, long time ago.
Thank you, Hope. Well, this is a great opportunity. We have this expert live with us now, and this isn't the last time we'll see her. We're going to continue working with Hope over the next several months and know that she brings a lot of value with the prevention work she actually did in the schools there in the Minneapolis area. And she continues. She's not in a school setting anymore, a traditional school setting with a lowercase t in a classroom. She's using the great outdoors. She's using the land of our ancestors to teach the lessons today with our young people and know
I
that
do,
the connection. Thanks. Go ahead.
sorry, I do work with Indian Ed. There's Indian education programs. For those of you in different states, you might look at that. Of course, there's federal funds for, that's part of the treaties, is that there should be federal funds, GOM funding or different funding status for each child who's an enrolled tribal member. So when you look at that, they need some Indigenous education. And it was really interesting last night. I was talking to just a regular classroom teacher that works in we call it an all nations native program at South High. And she said she could tell, she came up to this student. She goes like, you must go to the Ogichida program with Indigenous Peoples Task Force. She goes like, how did you know that? She goes, because you know your ways and you know how to present. You're not hiding. And that made me feel so happy to hear this regular school teacher could see Native students that knew their ways and weren't hiding. So sometimes, if you've got programs out there that just provide some support, some teachings, you're really making a big difference in somebody's life. It might be life and death. You don't know. You're giving them the tools to really succeed in whatever's going on in the world right now and maybe in the future. So I see that over and over again. That's why all through January to until right now, I think I did 45 storytelling lessons. Ona used to say, if you started telling the stories when the frogs stopped singing, you'd still be telling stories when they sang again if you tried to tell all of them. There's that many. So you're never going to run out of those old traditional stories. Many of them are not recorded. Like I was not given permission to record stories, but some of them, some people have recorded stories. So don't feel uncomfortable with what the tools you have. You know, ask your elder, ask your family. I always say that, you know, if they say, oh, that old Hope, she doesn't know anything, that's fine too. You know, just go to your tribe, go to your family, find somebody you trust, find a trusted person that you can share things with, and look at what's going on in your life and look at what you need to thrive.
Yes. And we'll keep this discussion going after today. Remember, you will get a follow-up email with us, from us, with resources to support you in the native nutrition area. We are going to put together a final toolkit, actually, at the end of the series, at the end of April, where it'll have many resources, many options for you to continue these conversations with Hope and other professionals that are sharing their expertise, their experience, their knowledge, so that we can help in this field of prevention. Because remember, the key is our culture, our tradition, our indigenous ways of knowing is prevention. There is strength in what we know. There is strength in who we are. There's strength in our culture. So, Chimigwich to everybody, thank you so much. Nalit Sam, please take time to register for our next session. Take time to do the survey. Both of those links are in the chat box. We hope we can see you next week. Have a good afternoon, everybody.